Hi, I'm Shauna Day, a partner with Better Food Ventures in the Mixing Bowl, and I'm very excited to be joined by Megan Nunes, who's the CEO of Vinsight. Megan, tell us a little bit more about Vinsight, and also tell us a little bit about your background, because you've got a really interesting journey that's brought you to this place now.
Yeah, for sure. So Vinsight is forecasting for agriculture, and we specialize in forecasting high value and specialty crops, which basically means everything outside of corn, wheat, and soy. The two crops that we currently focus on are grapes and almonds in the state of California, as well as in Australia, which was a recent launch. And as far as why I decided to solve for this problem, it's kind of an interesting mix of my background in remote sensing, where I worked for about 7 years for a CubeSat satellite company that was generating pictures of the Earth. And I basically leveraged my background in agriculture. I grew up in the Central Valley. I studied at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and this is kind of the first time where I'm bringing my two worlds together of remote sensing technology and then my heritage of agriculture and farming.
Why specialty crops? Why not commodity crops?
Yeah, so when I first started the company, I kind of thought about, okay, what are the main problems that are here? And many of the folks that I spoke with happen to be California farmers. And if you know a little bit about California agriculture, we typically grow specialty crops in this area, in this region. It was really important to me to be giving back and focus in an area that was kind of where I'm from, and deal with the problems that these folks have. And one thing that people, I think, often overlook is that corn, wheat, and soy operates on an exchange, whether it's the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and then you have lots of organizations like the USDA and a handful of other companies that are providing context and information about the corn, wheat, and soy markets and how they're operating and what supply is going to look like. Whereas with specialty crops, especially like your grapes and almonds, where these are very high value crops that exist in California as well as across the globe, and they operate also in futures-like markets. However, the way in which they are traded is typically based around sentiment, and there's a significant lacking of information and data for people to make the best decision possible for either their farm operation or their direct-to-export sale and so on.
So can you give us some examples of how one of your customers might use the data, might use the information that you're collecting?
Yeah, so we typically look for folks that we use the term vertically integrated or full stack, meaning that they buy a good portion of commodity crop type on the market, they grow a handful themselves, and then they either handle the direct-to-consumer or direct-to-export trade. So being that we are fortunate to work with folks that kind of are full stack in their workflow, we've had the opportunity to see how yield forecasting can touch many different folks along the supply chain. So we can start with the grower, for example. Yield directly correlates to the number of inputs that you would need, whether that be water or that be your fertilizers or nutrient management plans, for example. And so if you have high enough fidelity sooner in the season of understanding what is my crop potential going to be this year, you can better match your input costs, which happen to be one of the higher cost items along your balance sheet. And then for folks that are kind of on the trading side of things, understanding where you can take a position within the market and hopefully be on the upside of that number whenever you decide to trade or sell a decent percentage of your goods, just allows you to make the more informed decision, ultimately maximizing the profitability back to your company.
So tell us a little bit about how is yield forecasting done today versus what your technology solution is providing, and how have you improved the accuracy of that?
Yeah, so today, forecasting is done basically by pencil and paper and a little bit of gut instinct. And physically, that translates into somebody going into the field, looking at grape clusters, counting them, and then going to another vine, doing that again, and extrapolating based around number of rows, and then number of vines and total size of that block that they're counting for. And then that usually generates a specific number, and then from there a gut check goes on it, which moves the number up or down on the scale, however the person feels they think things are going to turn out this season. That generates about a 40% error rate in understanding your total production.
Yeah.
And so at Vinsight, we wanted to basically remove some of the human in the loop almost, if you will, and allow for the information and the data around these crops to allow to be the driving factors around what is yield really going to be. So for us, we look at data sets from 4 major categories, which include remote sensing data, climate and weather information, geographical information like slope, soil type, and then finally historical yield, which is what allows us to calibrate our models. Yeah. So we built out a database of about 20 years of information for both California as well as Australia. And these data points, which we call features, are the inputs into our models that allow us to produce a forecast. And so we've spent a significant amount of time utilizing this information to train to understand what most likely correlates against crop potential size in any given season. And that changes month over month depending on what weather trends we're seeing, and ultimately also affects total yield production.
Got it.
And that gives us about a 10% error rate or 90% accuracy in understanding production both at the field level as well as at scale.
That's amazing. Speaking of amazing, again, I think your journey as an ag tech entrepreneur has been a really remarkable one, and there's a particularly soft spot in my heart for Megan because we come from neighboring towns in the Central Valley, small towns, and I find your story very, very inspiring.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear, I think our audience would love to hear more about how difficult it has been for you as an entrepreneur in this emerging ag tech landscape. You're coming from originally from a small town. You now split your time between the Bay Area and Gustine.
Yeah.
And I'd like for you to tell us a little bit more about what some of those challenges have looked like, and also please share some of the successes as well, because you've had some great successes.
For sure. So, there's many challenges, and there's also been some monumental successes, I think, that help make the journey and the path continuous. For one, when we first started Vinsight, it was really difficult to convince people that were a lot like my dad or my family members that, like, hey, you should trust a computer and an algorithm to tell you what your crop production is going to be. And so status quo, I would say, was for sure one of the largest bottlenecks that we suffered early on into the business. And I think being able to figure out how to communicate our product and how we are being helpful in layman's terms, and it took a lot of practice to get people to a place where they were able to grasp and understand. And then from a product standpoint, figuring out ways to build trust. If you are not familiar with the agriculture industry, trust is a foundation across how everybody pretty much does business for the most part. And being able to instill that in a product as well as a company with your customer is difficult to do when that product is a data product and going against a way somebody has always done something, even though your results are better. Just being able to bring them with you on that journey is definitely a process. Yeah. We were very fortunate to finally get the ears of some folks that are very large within both the grape and almond industry early on that were willing to work with us as we went through the developmental phases of building out our algorithms and our technology. And we've been very fortunate that we've been able to build a decent customer base and get some traction around different acreage, whether it be wine or table grapes. And then an almond is basically the same for the most part across the board.
Yeah.
But in general, I would just say in the beginning, it was really getting people to take it seriously and not just think that, oh, nice idea, solid pipe dream, we're not sure that this would ever work, and go away. And that process took a lot of refinement around language and trying to figure out how to get them to come on board. Even after they vocalized the problem, we were like, hey, solution. But that wasn't
the trust.
It wasn't enough. We had to spend a decent amount of time to build that trust gap, and luckily we've been able to do so successfly.
Well, because you've been able to add value.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, that's
exactly.
the most important thing.
Exactly.
Okay, now
value and cost savings.
Value and cost savings. Give us a couple of highlights as well.
Oh man. If I think about our product in particular, because that's something I'm very proud of, we're a very product-centered company, and we operate from the standpoint of we solve for the customer, and they are our first priority. And so we've recently just did a big overhaul of our product, and we went from this kind of exploratory map interface to something that really just allowed the user to have access to what they were looking for at their fingertips immediately. And so we just adopted this dashboard type of interface where our customer can now go and see all of their specific fields called out with exactly the yield. We now show what are the top drivers that are affecting your yield. Also, utilizing that as a way to prove trust into the model and the model performance that we're showing. And then we included a weather application, which was a recent launch. We started as just giving a single yield number, but we learned that from a trust standpoint, the customer had a difficult time ingesting that yield number if it was different than their expectation. So by adding in weather and including the top features that we often see in our models, and then giving that historical trend and showing, hey, this period of time happens to be most similar to X, further just arming their arsenal with additional information so they can ultimately make the best decision for their operation.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that you've talked about the evolution of how you present information to your to your customer, and that's a learning process.
Yes,
but it's, I mean, to that point of adding value and helping ultimately monetize what you're providing. I think that's really interesting. This idea of information presentation and how important that is to a grower.
Yeah, in the beginning, I think we really underestimated how important that would be because we were so focused on model. Like, you want a good model that gives 90% at a specific point in time in the season and updates so frequently. And we really let the user interface side of kind of the business be put on the back end because we were so focused on the model development and information development side of things. And I think at some level we lost potential users that were interested in coming on board because they would look at the application and kind of thought, well, what do I navigate here and how do I make this work for me?
Right.
Decent prototype, but it wasn't enough to service a wider variety of customers that were interested in our information. And so by kind of just learning and hearing what people say and taking that feedback in, and it's important when you do product development to focus on kind of a closed loop interaction where you put something out, you follow up with a customer to see what they think about it, ask them what their raw feedback is. Oftentimes it's maybe not what you want to hear, but it's what needs to be heard. And then you loop that feedback back into the development cycle in order to just help ease with adoption because ag, as we know, does not have typical adoption cycles.
Yep. Hey, great. Megan, I'd love to thank you for joining us today. Not only have you built a tremendous company, but also one of the most dynamic ag tech entrepreneurs out there. So thanks very much.
Very sweet.
For being with us.
Thank you.